two basic issues when we're dealing with elements and beginning to get into grammar are guttural letters and the definite article. We'll begin with the guttural letters. There are several guttural letters in Hebrew, including Aleph, Het, Ayin, and though Resh is not a guttural letter, it does share some characteristics with the guttural letters, so we usually include that in our discussion. We'll begin with Aleph. Aleph has a preference for sagol. So often we'll find Aleph with a sagol or even a hatuf sagol, like in Elohim. The other characteristic of Aleph is sometimes it quiesces, and the word quiesce means to get quiet. So for example, the first word of the Bible is Bereshit. And you'll notice in Bereshit there's a tsere before the Aleph. And the tsere is so strong and the Aleph is so weak that the Aleph quiesces. It becomes really just subsumed under the tsere, Bereshit. That's called quiescing. The letter He is often used at the end of a word to mark a comets. Many words end in comets, He. So much so that when the comets is there, when the He is there as an actual letter, it will be marked with mapik. So for example, if we have the word Arza, if it were her land, it would be marked with a mapik to show that the He is not there to just mark the comets, but the He is there as a consonant. If we removed the mapik from the He, then the meaning of the word changes. This would be to a land. And in that case, the He is just actually functioning in a whole different way. So it's important to notice whether a makef is there in the final He, marking it as a consonant. The letters Het and Ayin are very strong, and they have a strong preference for patak, or patak, hatuf patak. It's a very strong tendency, and so often the vowels will assimilate to patak, even if they're different letters, when there's an ayin or a het in a word. Now, in a normal word, let's say the word for horse is sus. That works just fine. But in a word that ends with one of these strong guttural letters, we can't have ruch. We have to have a furtive patach. So this is the exception to the normal rule that there cannot be two vowels next to each other. In the case where a word ends with an ayin or a het, there must be a patach to get into it because it's such a strong guttural letter. So ruach. Another example is if we compare two standard verbs, shavar, he broke, and avar, he crossed over. They both begin with a comets and then are followed by a patach. However, when we convert shavar to imperative, shavor, you'll notice that the first vowel is reduced to a shva, but that just won't work in the case of avar. The vowel's also reduced, but it's reduced to a hatuf patak, a combination shva patak, and that's because of the strong preference for a patak by an ayin. Next, let's discuss the article. The article is attached to the front of words when the word is made definite. There's other ways a word can be definite. It can be definite if it has a possessive pronoun like his dog. It's a particular dog. Or a person's name, Fido. It's a specific definite dog. Or we could say the dog. In that case, we would want to add the definite article, which is a he, a patak, and a dagesh in the first letter of the word. Let me illustrate this by using the word for horse, sus. If we wanted to make this definite, the horse, we would need to add a he, a patak, and a dagesh in the first root letter. Need all three to say the horse. Now, if we wanted to say a spirit, we would say ruach, ruach. If we wanted to say the spirit, we would have the he. We would start with the patak, but we have a problem because the guttural letters reject doubling, they reject dageshim. So since we can't put a dagesh in the resh, what happens is what we call compensatory lengthening of the vowel. So the patak becomes a kametz to compensate for the fact that we cannot double the resh. Now again, this is a consistent pattern. So if we took another word, the word for day, yom, and we wanted to say the day, we would add a he, add a patak, and put a dagesh in the first root letter, hayom, the day. Now, if we took another word with a different guttural letter, we'll take the word av, for father. Now again, we'll put the he on the beginning, and we'll put the tak here, but we cannot double the aleph, because guttural letters cannot be doubled. So because we cannot put a dagesh in the aleph, then we have to lengthen the vowel that's under the he to compensate. So we call this compensatory lengthening. And so when we see a kametz under the he, but no dagesh, we realize what's going on here. This is just compensatory lengthening of the vowel. So this covers many examples of adding a he to a word to make it definite. He, patak, and dagesh, or compensatory lengthening in the case of a word that begins with a guttural letter. However, the putting the article in the front of the word has a good number of exceptions compared to many other adjustments that we'll be making to words. I would encourage you not to try to memorize all of the rules I'm going to show you in a moment at first. Just become familiar with them, and it won't be the sort of thing that will mess you up. So here's our normal circumstance. We have the word melech, king, and we add a he, ptach, and a dagesh, hamelech, the king. Then if we take the word chesed, this is a little bit more unusual because normally we would have compensatory lengthening since this begins with a guttural letter. However, as I mentioned, because the Het has such a strong preference for the ptak that overrules the compensatory lengthening. So in the case of the faithful love, ha-chesed, we still have the ptak here. Not to worry, it's just because of the great strength of the Het that prefers the ptak as its guttural, as its preferred letter. Now, conversely, when we have to put the definite article before a word that begins with Aleph, Ayin, or Resh, it tends to lengthen, compensatory lengthening, to a kametz. So if we take the word ish, the word for man, and we want to say the man, ha-ish, because we cannot put a dagesh into the Aleph, the ptak lengthens to compensate into a kametz, ha-ish. Now, when a word begins with Het with a kametz, or an unaccented he with a kametz, or with an ayin, then the form of the article becomes he with a segol. Now again, that's a lot of different little rules here, and I would encourage you, just become familiar with this. Don't try to memorize these at first. This is not the sort of thing that'll trip you up as we go along. So if we take the word here, har, for hill, and haryam, the hills, and we make them into definites. In the case of hill, we have ha-har, just what we would expect, because it begins with a guttural letter and it's accented. Notice this rule only applies to the unaccented. When it begins with an accented har, then we have compensatory lengthening, making the ptak under the article become a kametz. Now, in the case of haryam, this is an unaccented he with the kametz. So notice then, in that case, the article becomes he with a segol. And finally, one more example of sort of the oddities here. When a word begins with a mem, shva, or a yod, shva, then we simply have he with a ptak and no dagesh. And that's just the nature of the situation. So if we take the word yaladim, children, and we wanted to say the children, we would have ha yaladim. And so in this case, notice there's no dagesh in the yod. We could not have that because of the shva here. It would change things around. So in this case, we just have add the he with a ptak to the front of that. Again, I would encourage you, become familiar with these sorts of different kinds of things, but you'll notice none of these will really mess you up. You can see that when you have words that begin with gutturals, just expect that something's going on. This is the most predictable sort of thing you'll see when a word begins with a guttural, just compensatory lengthening. And then all your other normal letters that can take dageshim, they'll look perfectly fine. Hamelech with a dagesh in the first root letter.